Welcome to Rays of Hope, Masikhanye. My name is Sivu Kotela. I am your host. The Bible says that you are the light of the world, and it is the purpose of this program to empower you, families and societies with tools and strategies to help you to become that light as you make this world a better place. Speaking about making this world a better place, this month we are starting a series that looks into the theme of hope for the African family. And to help me start our conversation, I am joined by Pastor Candy Olisa Swarts, who is going to help me look into the biblical definition of what is a family. Pastor Swarts, welcome to Rays of Hope.
What a profound program we have here. And I'm really honored to be part of this august program.
We are the ones that are honored to be having you here for many, many, many reasons. But hey, different people have got different definitions for what a family is. So much seems to be changing. The definitions to be so fluid that what we accept to be the definition of a family now may not be the same in 2 years' time. But talk to me about, what does the Bible define a family to be?
First and foremost, the family is the institution of God. It's an institution that God set up, ordained to start up society, the human society. That is what a family stands for.
Okay.
That is how we can define the family.
Okay, all right. And then that would be the biblical definition. And does God, or does the Bible tell us what the purpose of having created families?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
It does, Sivu. The Bible tells us in many ways that in God's plan of salvation, He put the family right at the forefront to spin out and work out what it means for people to be saved. So the manner people relate within the family setting, makes up and helps them reach actually where God wants us to be, all of us.
All right. And then are there any biblical examples that perhaps you could relate to?
Oh yes. First and foremost, Adam and Eve were not born of men, but came from the hand of God. They were the very first to be created. Okay. And as immediately after they were created, God set them up as a family, first in marriage and then as an extended family with children.
So, Pastor Swarts, you are saying that so the purpose is the salvation of and the saving of the people. But how is that accomplished through families, number one? Number two, are there any biblical examples that demonstrate God's design of using families to save the world?
I will actually give you a few practical examples.
Okay.
One, for instance, is Noah. Noah was saved as a family, not as an individual.
Okay.
If we go and read in Genesis chapter 6, verse 18. Abraham also.
That's interesting.
Abraham also was entered into a covenant with God, remember? And that covenant was not necessarily between God and him. If we read from Genesis chapter 15, for instance, we might be misconstrued to think this was an agreement
just
between
God and
Abraham. Yet his very calling allowed Abraham to come out of his people and out of his country with his family. Not only so, when the covenant was brought together by God, it was not just between God and Abraham, but it was between God and Abraham's family. The circumcision, remember? It was not Abraham alone who went to the mountain. He went there with his sons and his greater family, actually. And of course, if we look still in Abraham, The setting of the tribes, if we read in Genesis chapter 49, for instance, we realize that it was not Abraham. God had said all nations will be blessed through Abraham. But that blessing was carried into nations by the 12 tribes
Sure.
that come out of Abraham. I could.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Do you have another example that you want to mention?
For instance, in the 10 Commandments,
Sure.
I've noticed 2 particular commandments that relate to families.
Sure.
The 5th and the 7th commandments.
Okay.
The 5th, whose reference is the
yes.
children,
Yeah.
and the 7th, whose reference are the 2 that come into union,
I'm with you.
that are supposed to keep that union in purity.
Sure.
Perfect,
Sure.
like that. You know, it all resides around families. And God's intent and intention is for us as families now to spread out his salvation
Sure.
to others, beginning with us in this nucleus family, touching others out there.
I love that. I mean, I absolutely love how you that's fresh for me, that while the conversation is between God and Abraham, but its implementation of the covenant goes beyond Abraham, but affects the entire family. I absolutely love that. But now the truth is, families are not just made up of one person, and now what you've just drawn is how a family as a collective responds to God's purpose, and how God has a purpose for the family as a collective. But do individuals in the family have different roles to play towards fulfilling that purpose of God?
Of course, yes. Beginning with the husband. You see, where we're at, we might be looking at the society at large. A society that is led by presidents, for instance. Yet, where all that begins is within the nucleus family, where the husband is the president and the wife is the minister. You get what I mean? So roles are quite pertinent in the family.
Okay.
Quite interesting for me to say that.
Sure.
Because one might be looking at me and thinking that I'm at war against roles.
Because you're a woman.
Because I'm a woman.
And how it has been used the whole issue of roles to limit women.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yet roles are quite pertinent.
Okay.
They are very, very important within the family and within societies. For instance,
yeah, sure.
I will take you further.
Yeah.
The husband has an expected role to play as the priest and the leader, the one that gives the guide in the family to his family. So the way the husband chooses impacts how his family will end up becoming. You see?
Okay.
And the wives, I love how it's penned out in Ephesians, for instance, that the husband is supposed to love the wife the same way that Christ loves the church. And the wife's role is to submit. And God is not mincing his words there, even in our misconstruences, many, if I may say.
Sure.
But that role is quite important for the wife to play, to submit to the husband.
Sure.
For if she does not, the children will not learn to submit to Christ, nor the husband for that matter. Because the manner that the wife submits to her husband teaches and impacts the husband to do likewise to Christ. It's more like an illustration, rolled out.
Sure. Now, Pastor Kendi, and I'm sure there are viewers at home that are saying, "Man, this submission thing and this headship thing," and you can almost understand, because historically, in different cultures, it has been misunderstood and misapplied and even abused. And before we continue with the roles of the other, because we are still going to get into the children,
Yes.
and I know you want to touch that, because a family is not just made up of wives and husbands,
Yes.
but there are other members. But what do you have to say to people that are very skeptical about the whole concept of there is a head and there is one that has to submit?
You see,
Is it still applicable today in today's families?
very much so. Very much so. It's critically important for the husband to love and for the wife to submit.
Sure.
It's roles that God created to bring out the beautiful symbiance of a family.
Sure.
And not only for the benefit of the people within this family, but to impact the children themselves that will tomorrow become new families,
Sure.
extending the society like that. Can you ever imagine how it would have been if each family, like if Adam's family, we would have Adam loving Eve like Christ loves the church, and have Eve submitting. Those are two different concepts.
Sure.
Loving and submitting. They are equal in their essence.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
Quite very
Sure.
critically important.
I love what you're saying, because the truth is almost every culture, strangely and interestingly enough though, almost every culture emphasizes the need of the woman to submit, and even outside the Bible. But not every culture speaks about the need of the husband to love, and not just like love, any love, but as Christ has loved the church. But what you're actually saying is that these two go beyond culture.
Do you want me to tell you something?
Yes, please.
Had my own personal marriage worked out well, I always sit and imagine how beautifully our marriage it would have turned out to become. Now, I would love for other families to sit and think about that. Not just families, the women and the men that constitute families, to sit and think a bit if they would allow God to use them the way that He wants to use them, how far they would grow, how beautifully their lives would turn out. It would be a success story.
Thanks, Pastor Swarts. Now, you were still mentioning the three before I interjected, and I just needed to do that. You had mentioned the roles of the wives, the roles of the husbands, mothers, fathers, but you were now going to go into the children.
Children also have a role to play. Yes.
Because I thought the role of the children is to sit there and be acted upon and just listen to what the parent is saying, that nothing is expected of them. Yeah.
The fifth commandment, which gets repeated in Ephesians chapter 6, for instance. Yes. Children, obey your parents. And it's not just a commandment, but a commandment couched within a blessing. The only commandment with a blessing. The lives of the children will be extended if they obey their parents. And the reason for that, comes in and trudges in within that love and that submission of the mother and the father.
I love it. So this this is beautiful. So you are saying that these expectations of these roles do not happen in a vacuum.
No.
That the parents, the mother and the father, can actually influence the child's ability to obey. And the father's love can actually influence the mother's ability to submit. And the wife's submission can influence I love this interplay. Talk to me about that.
And you see, whilst all that is happening, we are actually fulfilling the purpose God has for us to understand authority, His authority. Now, once we understand God's authority, it's all systems go. We would tomorrow leave this place and go back to heaven.
Because that's the purpose you said at the beginning of family, is to prepare this world for heaven.
Yes.
By demonstrating what heaven looks like.
Yes.
Absolutely love that. Now, any closing thoughts, Pastor Swarts?
Of course, there's also the role of siblings.
Of course.
As it's penned out in 1 Timothy chapter 5.
Sure.
You know, the expectation is for siblings to love and respect each other. To love and respect each other. And in closing, I just want to appeal to families to reconsider God's plan for us. It is beautiful and powerful. Its intention is to uplift us than to bring us down. And by denying God his intentions for our lives, we actually are pulling ourselves down.
Pastor Swarts, I absolutely loved how you as I've said, the relationship between, the spouses, the father, the mother, and them and the child, and the child and the parent. But then you've also added another important one, and even given us a biblical principle for it, how also siblings should relate to one another.
Yes.
Pastor Swarts, thank you so much for having joined us. I really appreciate having your time here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Our viewers at home, I trust that you have enjoyed that segment with Pastor Swarts. Remember, it starts what is about to be a series of 5 episodes where we look into hope for the African family. We are not yet done. Don't go away. Stay there. We'll be back soon after the break.
Greetings, blessed of our Father. This is an invitation to all to join hands and impact our communities with acts of kindness. We are the feet, hands, and heart of Jesus, and we believe God when He says in Proverbs 19:17, "Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and He will repay him for his deeds." The 1st of May is Love Pack Day, set aside to feed and clothe the poor in our streets, orphanages, places of safety, and other places with need. We will also share a book to give hope to all who are troubled and in sorrow. God says to all of us, "For the poor will never cease to be in the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall freely open your hand to your brother, to your needy and poor in your land." Deuteronomy 15:11. If we ever needed to give before, we sure do need to give now, and never get weary. May the love of Jesus our Savior move us to give generously. It is more blessed to give than to receive. May we open our hearts and reach out to our communities in a tangible, meaningful way.
Every community has its ups and downs, its joys and its sorrows, from informal traders, children to pensioners. Everyone sometimes needs an ear to hear. Do you need prayer? Chat with the Cape Conference virtual pastor.
Welcome back to Rays of Hope, Masikhanye. I am Sivu Kotela. I am still your host. And right now we are continuing with our discussion on the definition of family as we've just started the new theme on hope for the African family. And so to help me discuss the topic of using or looking at family as a vehicle and custodian of cultural identity, values, and heritage, I am joined now by Dr. Musvosvi, who is an associate professor at Helderberg College of Higher Education in Somerset West, South Africa. Dr. Musvosvi, welcome to Rays of Hope.
Thank you, and greetings to you, Sivu, and also to your viewers.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we've seen a need to be specific with this theme, hope for the African family. But we can't do that without taking the time to define what family means or is in the African context. How do we define family?
Well, actually, maybe at face value, many people will look at family as father, mother, and children, or maybe a household. But in the African setting, perhaps especially back then, family actually extends beyond that.
Sure.
We speak of the extended family. It includes the uncles. So, for example, your father's brothers
Sure.
would be, that's a set of fathers that you have.
Sure, exactly.
And your mother's sisters, that's a set of mothers you have. And of course, the uncles, those who married your aunts, they also become your father. So it becomes very extended. There's almost no real limit. The limit is your particular need at that particular time. Because as long as you can establish those kinds of connections, then that's family. And in fact, we also have a way in which we can establish a network of family through what we may speak of as the clan name or the totem.
Yeah.
Anyone who has the same totem as myself is either a brother or a father. Of course, depending on the age.
Sure.
If they are of the same totem as my mother, then they become my mothers. Sure. If they are males, they become uncles.
Sure.
And so it's really not possible, in that context, in that way of thinking. It's impossible for you to not have family anywhere you go.
That's true.
You
That's
will
true.
find that there is somebody who is of the same totem. That is, if you meet other African people, and sometimes it actually goes across tribes, because if you are of, let's say, you are of the bird totem, and you are Shona speaking,
Sure.
but you meet somebody who is of the same totem, called, of course, by a different name in a different language, but it's the same.
Precisely.
Then you establish a relationship. They become your family.
I love that. And because for me, that's what makes us distinct, maybe, from other definitions of what a family is. And sometimes in other families, I know it's the case in the Xhosa culture, and I think Shona as well. Before we even, if you come and say, I want to get married, before they even ask what the surname of the girl that you want to marry, they ask you what is their clan name. Because you cannot marry somebody that you share the clan name. You may never have met. They may come from a different town or even a different country. But if you share the same name, that's how important it is in the African culture, right?
Yes. In fact, I know of some families where that kind of scenario occurred, and the young couple had to break, the relationship.
Sure.
Now, of course, in the days that we live in, we find that there are some families that are beginning to transcend that.
Sure.
But in the olden days, if there was reason for these two to marry, if there was going to be consent, there had to be special ceremonies.
Precisely, yes.
There had to be very special ceremonies that were meant to, first of all, break the relationship that would have been identified.
Sure.
And then they would then re-establish a new relationship which comes through marriage.
Precisely.
But it was taken that seriously.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Dr. Musvosvi. And of course, today we are looking into how then family is a custodian and a vehicle of transferring those values, that identity, and even heritage. What are some of the ways that the African family gets to transfer and share those values?
Family, being a part of a family implies spending time together. Unfortunately, because of urbanization and globalization and modern trends, we find that families no longer really live together. And of course, that breaks a certain kind of fabric. But in the ideal situation, as we used to have it back then, families were intact.
Sure.
In other words, children did not go off to boarding school at a very young age and spend most of their time away. They would spend time with the family, even if they had to go and maybe look after the animals. But in the evenings, they come back and they are together. So the time that is spent together is what helps to, to pass on some of the values and ways of thinking. Certain cultural concepts would be spread because of that time together. And it's not just idle time. It's it was time in which there was some kind of interaction. Today, the family may be together, but each one is on their phone or doing their own thing. Yeah. This one is in their room. But back then, when family was together, they were doing something together. Perhaps there is somebody who was telling stories. And the children were listening, and those stories would have certain kinds of moral teachings that they would be teaching. The heroes of those stories, and there's something that was communicated in those stories, either wisdom or diligence in what you are doing, honesty. So
in Xhosa, sorry for it, we call it intsomi.
Intsomi, yes. My language it's Ngano, and those are stories, the folklore that would be told. There would also be times when people would sing. Children would sing. In the community, they would sing, and the songs were meant to convey certain certain truths or certain concepts. There are also other activities, such as eating, for example. When you eat together, some things happen. Some things you are told directly, but actually some things you simply experience them. So, for example, when I was growing up, it was in the eating setting that I found out that I could not use my father's plate. There was a plate which was designated for my father. And there was a cup for him. Yeah, we did have we did have the same. So there's
his
this
own
plate,
spoon, his own cup.
Yes, and you can't use it. I mean, you when you are choosing maybe a cup to drink from, you pick that one. Mom will say that's father's cup, and you've got to put it back. And you cannot use his dish. Let's say, for example, you want to go to the fields. You're going to sow some seed. You cannot use his plate to carry the seed. It has to be something else. And so in the process of those kinds of activities, certain values are communicated, sometimes not explicitly, but implicitly. You get to understand that, father, is an authority figure here. There's a bit of hierarchy that is kind of instilled into you. And that happens to be one of the values of African culture.
One of the ways, and of course you mentioned earlier on the issue of time. One of the interesting things about the African culture is that our values are not mostly taught, but they are caught. And that happens because we spend time. That can only happen because we are spending time.
Yes, when we spend time, that is a time when certain ways of thinking, they just rub on to the next generation. And sometimes it is not because you have been implicitly told. I mean, explicitly told, but it is something which is implicit.
Implied,
it's implied in what is taking place. You get the sense that this is the way things should be. So the family in that way then helps to pass on some of those values and ways of thinking.
And I don't want, and I hope our viewers do not miss this, that as we've always appreciated the activity of spending time together. It may not be, of course, we don't say, hey, come, let's spend time together. But you find that in sharing activities, as you are saying, in sharing work together, in going to the fields together. But ultimately, there is the value that time spending is essential to make families.
Yes. Yeah. And in the process of working, for example, maybe it is doing certain chores. This is a time when the children can be able to see role models, maybe their elder brothers, what they are doing, or maybe even the parents. It is in the process of maybe participating in the activities of life that the children get to see. Father is honest. They don't have to be taught always that you must be honest, but they can see it exemplified by the father or by the mother or by the brothers. And right now we're talking about something maybe as as clear as honesty.
Yeah.
But there are also certain ways of thinking which are maybe a little more subtle than that.
Sure.
But which you are, as a child, you are able to catch as you see life,
precisely.
just happening
Precisely.
before you.
Thank you, Dr. Musvosvi. But of course, we can't end this conversation without talking about the actual values now. Now, of course, time has changed, setups have changed. But what are some of the values that you think it doesn't matter, what time it is, we cannot afford to forget as the African families?
I think a value which I seem to find in many African settings is the value of hierarchy. For good or ill, it is a value among many African people. I think its upside or its positive side is when order is maintained, when there is harmony, there is an authority figure. The parents are respected as they should.
Yeah.
So hierarchy is kind of instilled in many different ways, sometimes explicitly, but sometimes also implicitly. I mentioned earlier on about the father's cup. In the father's plate. That when that happens, it tells you that he is important, and he's an authority figure. But more than that, we also have other ways in which this is instilled. So, for example, hierarchy is hindered to even in the names that we call our relatives. Many of our relatives, not necessarily all of them, but many of them. So, for example, when I speak about my brothers, there is one name for brothers who are older than me. There is another name for brothers who are younger than me.
And you can't call the older one without first mentioning that one as a prefix.
Yes. Actually, growing up, you are taught from a very young age, you don't just say to your elder brother, Sivu. You have to use the prefix. You have to use that word, brother, Sivu.
Buti Sivu. And in
Shona, it is Mukoma.
Mukoma, yes.
So I could never call any of my older brothers by their first name, but without beginning with that. Younger brother, you can. You are allowed to. So again, hierarchy is instilled in that way. When I speak about my father's brothers, the brothers who are older than my father, there is a word in my language. You have to call them bigger father or greater father or older father. And then the ones who are younger than him, they are your younger fathers. And then, of course, your father
exactly.
Then your father becomes your father. I mean, you just call him father.
In Xhosa, your father would be Utata, and then his younger brother would be Yes, I get that. Okay, let's move to another value quickly. I don't want us to miss these. These are interesting.
There is also the value of community. I think in many African cultures, community is important. And this is part of the reason why you find the extended family, being vibrant, and because people want to make community. Now, sometimes, of course, that is mentioned to you, or the importance of that is mentioned to you in very explicit ways, but it is also instilled sometimes in very, more subtle ways. So, for example, as children growing up, we would eat in the same plate. We had to eat in the same plate. And of course, in that situation, hierarchy would also come in. The older one picks
starts first.
Starts first. But you eat together. But you also will find out that you cannot have any activities in the family which you as a core family just do by yourselves. My child cannot get married and I'm the only one who is officiating. In fact, when my child gets married, usually it is one of my brothers who is actually the father. When they say, well, we want to hear from the father, I don't stand up. I deliberately will ask one of my brothers, quite often the eldest, but sometimes it is one who is, to whom that task is delegated, maybe by the oldest one. But then we get the idea that you cannot marry your child alone. We as a family, we marry our child. We as a family, we bury our dead. I cannot bury them alone.
Okay, Sorry for pushing you. Time is against us, but I don't want to miss maybe 1, 2 or more. So you've spoken about hierarchy, you've spoken about community, and then 1 or 2 more?
There are a number of them.
Sure.
There are a number of them which could also include respect for people. It could include honesty and a number of those. Maybe just before time runs out, I want to mention that some of these values have their positive side. For example, community.
Yes.
You need community when you are grieving, when something important is happening, you need community.
Yeah.
It has its positive side, but it can also have a negative where people then begin to have groupthink.
Sure.
And it removes my own personal responsibility for doing the right thing.
Sure. I do it because
I do it because we are family. The hierarchy, it is good for maintaining order, for harmony, and for a number of other positive things as well. But it can also have a negative in the sense that the one who is the greatest, it then appears as if they can never do any wrong. And so quite often you find people who get away with murder, so to speak. So perhaps it is important for us to be able to see that there are a number of these values that we have. And we look at these values and know that living in a sinful world, indeed, they have become contaminated. Our ways of thinking can become contaminated. But without us losing the fact that these values can contribute a lot of good to society as well.
A lot of good to society. Dr. Musvosvi, I'm sorry, I don't know where the time went. I enjoyed that, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Viewers, we've come to the end of our conversation with Dr. Musvosvi. I trust that you enjoyed that and inspired by it. We are not yet done. Please stay where you are. We'll be back soon.
Every community has its ups and downs, its joys and its sorrows, from informal traders, children to pensioners. Everyone sometimes needs an ear to hear. Do you need prayer? Chat with the Cape Conference virtual pastor.
Welcome back to Rays of Hope, Masikhanye. I am still Sivu, your host, and we are concluding our discussion on family, its definition and purpose. And to help me do that, right now I am joined by Pastor Andrew Gouws, who is going to help me look into family as a social change agent. Pastor Gouws, welcome to Rays of Hope, Masikhanye.
Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate the opportunity.
Once again, we really appreciate having you here. And you are a clinical pastor. Yes. What does that mean? What does that entail? What do you do on a daily basis?
Okay, so basically with a clinical pastor, it's a pastor that practices pastoral care within a clinical environment. Mm-hmm. So with me, I'm doing some pro bono work at Helderberg Hospital, which means that, let's say, for example, there's a patient that needs the family to be brought in for either care position or if there's some boundaries that need to be established within a family environment. I work with the team in order to facilitate that process. But the tool that I use is pastoral care as a method. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, let's delve into today's program, where we are looking into family as an agent for social change. One would think families have got so much to deal with already within the family. Is it really necessary to add this extra burden of having to consider the society and being a change agent there? Your thoughts?
I think we need to understand what is a family.
Sure.
And I like to break things down a little bit to understand, but what does society consist of? We would say groupings of communities, either along religious lines or cultural lines, but then what do these communities consist of? It would be families. Okay, and then within the African context, we would not break it down as far as the individuals, that you have this individual that stands alone, but that individual would also be interpreted within the family context. So family is at the center of any societal change. So being an agent, it's not should we be, but it is.
Sure.
So what this question actually asks is how to be a positive influence. So changing society for the positive.
Sure.
So yes, the family is central to that concept of bringing change within society.
And why is that? Why is that?
It's because the family existentially connected to each other. If we were to bring it back to the concept of honor your father and your mother.
Sure.
Why does God say honor your father and your mother? Why doesn't it bring in the children? I think it's a universal principle, because if I were to ask you, Sivu, are you a child?
Sure.
Yes,
For sure.
you have to be. That's the existential
exactly.
nature of being human, is that you are a child. But you can't ask everybody, are you a father?
I love
are you a
that.
mother? Okay?
Sure.
So that principle, and if you look at how God gives us that commandment, it actually brings in that both the parents and the children have responsibility in honoring, but we won't go into that principle
I'm sorry
now.
for interjecting. I've got to repeat it. Not everybody is a mother or a father, but everybody is a child.
Is a child.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a central concept to families, is that accountability and that responsibility that then rest within this relationship.
Sure.
Even the elderly person that's stuck somewhere in a room and there's nobody to support except the caregivers, that person's still a child. Okay, because they have a mother and a father. So I like to work from, when we work towards the concept of social change, from that perspective. That what does a child need?
Sure.
What does a child need? Okay, trustworthiness.
Sure.
Trustworthiness, and trustworthiness is a big concept.
Sure.
But I think we can break it down again to some simple movements.
Sure.
And when it comes to the child as a social change, within a child you also have the hope of the next generation. And I think that's something that we also need to work with constantly, is that hope of what are we giving over to the next generation. So that's where legacy comes in. And we haven't been quite fair towards the next generation. Instead of handing over a legacy, we've actually handed over de-legacies. And within that de-legacy concept, you have injustice that permeates that encounters. So let's start with the child. Let's ask, what does a child need? And that's trustworthiness.
Sure.
So if we want to look towards changing our society, let's look towards being trustworthy
Sure. And
to our fellow human being, because
legacy.
by definition, we're all children.
I love that. I love that. Now, look. What we try to do at Rays of Hope is to help our viewers, everybody that is watching, with practical steps on how to do the things that we talk about. And we've established that it's important for families to have that purpose in mind, that they are agents of social change. But what are practical ways that families could do that?
Okay. I would start again more in the philosophical dimension, where one of my favorite academics, he was a psychiatrist. He developed a contextual approach to therapy, Boshin Meni Naj. He said every child has the right to give and to be seen and recognized. So recognition is a big concept within our daily interactions with each other. And once that recognition is not given, it creates a kind of a destructive entitlement, because there's something within us that constantly desires recognition. But not just mere compliments. You know, when we talk about recognition, it's something much deeper. So recognition is actually acknowledging the fairness that is happening in this, the trustworthiness, that the responsibility that rests upon my parents, they are accountable to it. And that gives us this perspective that if we move towards a recognition, what can a child give within my family household? Am I recognizing that? And to have the appropriate recognition accompany that. So not to expect our children to be adults. You know, and parentification takes place, which is a kind of a destructive movement. allowing a child to experience what it means to be an adult before he's ready is not a healthy movement.
Sure.
So, and that happens within our societies because of the systemic injustices that persist. Having a child having to go out and work before they need to,
Having
and
to worry about what they're going to eat tomorrow.
to eat, having that responsibility
Sure.
of a parent as a child. And that creates destructive movement. So I think a practical thing would be to, as a society, as families, as parents, as grandparents, to give adequate recognition.
I love that.
Even at a young age. So that develops within a child that if I'm of service within my household, it's a good feeling.
Sure.
And it encourages
Sure.
then the next
love
step.
that.
And you grow in that responsibility.
So you mentioned the recognition.
Recognition.
Yes. Yep. And then any other?
I like the word of constructive entitlement. Okay, so all of us are entitled towards fairness.
Sure.
Fairness. Now, when that is removed, we kind of have this experience of, but I need it. And you have two ways of then interacting with the world. It's either of a lack of want, or not lack of want, a want. You engage the world with a want.
Sure.
And that would be a destructive entitlement.
By that you mean from a position of want. You engage with the world from that position.
Yes.
Okay.
So all of us are in a relationship where we give and we take.
Sure.
And that's the fairness, is that you give and you take in balance. And that's where healthy families, and you that live in a family setup know that sometimes your child gives to you and you have to take that without giving something back, and there's a balance. There's always more responsibility that rests with the parent. But in this context of that destructive entitlement is where we have been neglected for so long that scale is tipped so much to the balance of unfairness that my interaction with the world is that it owes me. It owes me. It owes me. So coming back to a social change would be, let's start from a young age. Let's start addressing the injustices within our society that creates this destructive entitlement. Because ultimately it creates adults that have destructive behavior, can't keep relationships going. And that's an important aspect, to realize that fairness is embedded within us. And we need to address it within our family setup.
Pastor Gouws, and I mean, we could mention many other things that are symbolic of the injustices that you speak about in the society. But just one practical example. At home, you've got a boy and a girl, a daughter and a son, and you know that the world will not treat them the same way.
No.
And how do you, as a parent, inculcate in your son that your daughter, and by extension, every woman that he's going to interact with later on in life, that they are equal? And what are some of the practical ways from a very early age that you can inculcate
You
that?
can't leave it to an academic exercise.
Sure.
So you can't be telling your son, but your sister's equal to you, but you treat his mother as an unequal. It has to be practical.
Sure.
It has to be something
I love
that
that.
is fair.
Sure.
And children are much more in tune with unfairness and fairness.
Sure.
You would see that you would give your children something to share.
Sure.
And it has to be exactly the same,
Sure.
It's a lot more. So just in that practical thing, it has to be more than just the academic. It has to be more than a one-way traffic. It has to be a dialogue. And that can only happen when you recognize your child as of the same value as you as an adult. The expectations, the way in giving and receiving is different, but the intrinsic value for your grandmother, mother, daughter is exactly the same, because we believe in the Bible. We're created in the image of God, and that to me is central to the practical nature, making sure that if you talk the talk, you walk the walk.
I'm with you.
Especially.
Thank you for that. Now, of course, we've got to end, because I think naturally we as human beings, we sometimes see what needs to be done, and how it's going to benefit others. But there is that lingering, gnawing question, what's in this for me? Now, for families, you've done a good job in saying that we should be agents of social change. But what are the benefits for the family that is an agent? How does servings and serving others impact them as a family now?
Okay. I would believe that because we are created as relational beings,
Sure.
when we engage in service as a family, there is a taking, there's a weight that's added on the balance of fairness that brings about hope for the next generation, but there's also a peace that accompanies that, a sense of fulfillment that accompanies that. And if we were to ask, but can you monetize that?
Sure.
You know, can you put some materialistic value to it? I would say no, because that's the problem with our society.
Sure.
We try and value this but the car, the house, those type of things. Whereas within the relational ethical perspective, that recognition that we give, that relationship that we value, the peace that accompanies that,
Sure.
the holistic nature of belonging,
Yeah.
of seeing the other person empowered,
Yeah.
seeing that other person succeed because of what I've given in this relational context, is not something that you can describe.
Yeah.
You have to
Yeah.
experience
Sure.
it. And I think that's what we can achieve is families that are nurtured, families that have dialogue
Sure.
existing, families that are able to constructively deal with problems when they arise, so that it doesn't become explosion every single time, or you live in a frozen trauma, and you're just waiting for that eruption to take place. But that there's movements that is able to deal with the challenges that we are facing within our context.
Pastor Gouws, thank you so much. Thank you so much
Thank you, Stephen.
for joining us. I really appreciate your time. And you've given us so much to think about and to reflect on as we are ending this episode. Viewers at home, I trust that you enjoyed this segment with Pastor Gouws and the entire day. And if you have any questions in what he has said and what the two previous guests also said, please send us a message at the email that you see at the bottom of the screen, masikhanye@cc.adventist.org. And you can also send us a message at the number that you also see in the screen. Remember, the word of the Lord says that as you receive the light, you go out there and share that light. So let us go there and make this world a better place. Masikhanye. See you next time.